Claims that we've had, the succession of claims across the Atlantic over the course of the last few days about the domestic surveillance activities that are taking place over in the United States. Here on the set with me, Gerald Olivier, who's a journalist and editor at Atlantico. I'm also joined by Curtis Young, who's a professor of international relations at the American Business School. Here also Frédéric Douzet, who's a Castex chair of cyber strategy at the French Institute of Higher National Defense Studies and a specialist of US politics at the French Institute of Geopolitics. And from Washington, very early in the morning, is Christopher Sogian, who is principal technologist at the Speech, Privacy and Technology Project, the American Civil Liberties Union. We're also joined by James Creedon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how this is a particular issue has been playing out in the press. Of course, it was a huge story for The Guardian. It was they that broke the first series of revelations, but also the second. Tell us, first of all, about the interview and their coverage.
But I think it is interesting to look at what a big scoop this is for The Guardian, because they were very much involved in the WikiLeaks. They were one of the 5 papers, if you remember, that was involved with Le Monde, the New York Times and others in detailing those WikiLeaks documents. And here now they have the exclusive access to this particular leak, which has been called by Daniel Ellsberg, who was the guy behind the Pentagon Papers being released in 1971. He has called it the most important leak in US history. So, I mean, that's from somebody who himself was involved in a pretty important leak. So just to quickly detail some more of what he said, he said it gives us a chance to roll back what is tantamount to an executive coup against the US Constitution, unilateral decisions being taken about privacy, in other words. So I think from the Guardian perspective, certainly a big story.
Now, some are asking, James, how a vast programme of surveillance like this one could have remained hidden for so long.
That's right. Numerama is asking that particular question. Given how vast the scale of the surveillance was, what they think is surprising is not that the leak has come out, but that it didn't come out before now. And I think what's interesting too, when you listen to the interview with the guy behind the leak, he said that people just get used to the fact that there are these privacy infringements going on. They become almost complacent about it, and he felt he just couldn't live with himself, despite the comfort that it involved. Just quickly to get on to Obama as well, because this is pretty negative for Obama. You've got a lot of blogs such as this one, Melissa. Obama is checking your email, right? So you go down through it, and all of those unfortunate photos that were taken during pleasant sort of PR moments are now coming back to haunt him as he's peeping over people's shoulders reading the mail. Of course, he said you can't have 100% security and 100% privacy, but I'm sure a lot of people will be saying, well, 0% privacy isn't so great,
Now we're going to move on to the petitions that have been launched on the White House website.
That's right. Again, a reflection of how this is particularly bad news for the Obama administration. Pardon Edward Snowden. This is one petition that has been launched on the White House website. This, of course, was a move to, I suppose, underline the transparency of the Obama administration, allowing petitions to be uploaded onto their website. And I think it's kind of coming back to haunt them at moments such as this. Another one, President Obama, if you believe in NSA surveillance, we challenge you to a live public debate with Edward Snowden. That has almost 100,000 people signing it.
Thank you very much indeed, James Creedon. A look there at how this has gone down in the press and indeed with the public. What about that idea that James was just mentioning, Curtis? Part of the problem with this is that, just as with the WikiLeaks, we have found out through newspaper revelations and indeed whistleblowers of things that actually should have been made public, many people feel, in other ways. That is part of the thing that is feeding the suspicion of the public over this issue.
Exactly, and I think it's exacerbated by the fact that the American press is, in both of these situations, lags. In other words, there's this relationship between the government, the press, corporations. We're all sort of in the same business, and things sort of are okay. And I think that it's incredibly problematic. I think I agree with Daniel Ellsberg that this is huge, and it's very important, because the thing is, this is happening during Obama's watch. But we have to remember that, as you pointed out at the very beginning, this has been going on in this form through NSA since 1952. It's been going on through Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, et cetera, Reagan, all the way through. So I think this is an opportunity for us sort of to pull the covers back and reveal this
And
poison.
Perhaps, Christopher Segoyan in Washington, I'd like to put this to you, perhaps the real problem here is that we have a growing suspicion with regards to the state, to our governments, to the people in charge. And this sort of issue feeds it. In fact, it is right and proper that they should be in charge of looking after our security. The problem is that we are more and more suspicious of how they go about it and indeed who they really are and what their motives are. It's an issue really about broader trust in the government.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, we have this contract with our government, but that doesn't mean that they can suddenly start rifling through everyone's telephone calls and everyone's emails. I mean, there are checks and balances in our system of government. They have not been followed here. The government simply should not be collecting every single American's telephone calls. Even if they don't know what is being discussed, there are many kinds of communication where the metadata is just as sensitive, if not more sensitive, than what's happening on the phone. If you call a suicide hotline, if you call an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, if you call an abortion clinic, it doesn't matter what you say on the phone. The mere fact that you are making that phone call is exceedingly sensitive and should be protected, and it is shameful that the government has quietly and covertly captured all of this information without telling the public and without having any kind of informed debate.
One sentence. We haven't suddenly started doing this. We've been doing this for quite a long time. We've just suddenly found out about it.
We've suddenly found
I mean,
out
that's not true either. I mean, we learned in 2005 that this was happening, and then they had to change the law to continue doing so. They haven't been collecting metadata since the 1950s. That is something that probably started under Bush, but certainly not something that's been going on for 40 years.
What about, I'd like to put then the idea to Gérald Olivier, the idea they are rifling through our business, they have no right to do it, and the proper checks and balances that should ensure that this type of thing doesn't happen, or at least that we're informed of it, simply haven't been respected.
Well, it's true that they wouldn't have the right to do it if they were doing it. It's not quite true that that's actually what they are doing. Once again, the way the government functions, if they go into the content of a conversation, it's because they believe that they have a reason to go into that conversation. If you've been in touch with someone who's been in touch with someone who is believed to be involved in some kind of terrorist activity, they will look into that. And once again, they go through 2 checks, and there is a court order to do it. So it's not just done openly. What's fascinating me about this issue is that the program was started under Bush, and it was continued under President Obama, and there certainly are not quite the same characters. And the fact that both presidents maintained this program means that somehow there is a benefit to it, and I will take it. We are in we are in an age where people go around a marathon and they get bombed. And that's not you're supposed to expect in a free society. And you have to do something to prevent it and to protect your citizens.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting to see that you mentioned these stories were coming out through the press and whether it was normal, but I think it shows that probably the press is still necessary to the checks and balances of the American democracy, and it's been really emphasized during the Watergate story under Nixon. And here, if you saw, for example, the most, the real first major cyber attack that was launched by the U.S. government with the Israeli government against the Natanz, Iranian nuclear program, that was revealed by the New York Times. So it's not like the U.S. government is going to brag about these things because they are classified, but they have certainly major implication for democracies.
I'd like to move on to the issue of, there's a tweet, first of all, that perhaps we can look at, see what some of you have to say about this. The issue is lack of confidence in safeguards. Do you trust the state, asks this tweeter. I worry more about leakers like Snowden himself. Of course, it is an issue that's being debated widely. Tonight, the Commons in London has been debating the issue, and the British Foreign Secretary had this to say ahead of the debate about the checks and balances and respects of those that various governments had.
Intelligence gathering in this country by the United Kingdom is governed by a very strong legal framework, so that we get the balance right between the liberties and privacy of people and the security of the country. And that provides not for trawling through people's, the contents of people's phone calls. It provides for intelligence gathering that is authorized, necessary, proportionate, and targeted.
On that question, Christopher Seguin, we were just listening to William Hague there. Authorized, the word that he used there and that we were just debating here in the studio. In fact, even when it comes to looking at the contents of communications that have been looked at by the American government in these cases, there are checks, there are balances, there are court orders needed, and these things cannot be taken lightly at any level.
I mean, our FISA court issues around maybe 1,800 orders per year. Last year, they did not reject a single order. So it's tough to convey some kind of idea that this court is providing robust oversight over these surveillance powers. I also want to mention one thing in response to a point that was made by some of the other panelists. The surveillance performed by the National Security Agency, the concept of foreign intelligence isn't just about terrorism. The U.S. government, and in fact all governments, spy for political advantage. When the U.S. government is negotiating a treaty with a foreign government, if we can find out what the other government is thinking, what negotiating position they have going into the negotiations, that will give us an advantage. And in fact, we do spy on governments doing that, and everyone else spies on everyone. The key thing to note here, though, is that the Americans have an extreme advantage because of all of the information flowing through U.S. companies. Yes, certainly there is some information that's collected for terrorism investigations and for national security investigations, but let us not forget that the U.S. government, like all governments, is also collecting information for its own diplomatic advantage too.
What about that issue, Frédéric Douzet? If we leave aside the security issues and the fears of terrorism that allowed these sorts of measures to be taken, in fact, we can expect that they'll be used for a variety of others. Less
Absolutely.
necessary.
I mean, that's definitely what's going on, and that's what the Chinese are doing as well, and that's what the U.S. government is probably doing. I mean, they're collecting intelligence. They're collecting information, political information, technological information. It's true of political advantage, but also economic advantage. Now, I think that this story is a tremendous opportunity for Europe to try to have a different voice on this debate. I mean, that's what European countries have been trying to do. They haven't passed legislation yet, but thinking in terms of privacy, protection of personal data, and what does it mean that to apply these laws no matter where the companies are actually located, to try to get explicit authorization by the users to let their data being collected, and to have also their national regulation institutions to oversight this data collection, I think is really important.
In terms then of the competitive advantages that can be used by the Americans, I've just been hearing about, Gérald, there are steps that can and probably will be taken by Europeans and others to counter this.
Yes, but unfortunately, the companies are American, and you're not going to have a European Google tomorrow. You're not going to have a European Apple. Unfortunately for Europe, that's an economic fact which is separate from the debate we're actually looking at. The U.S. is an industrial and economic powerhouse. There's the one who put forward the information age, and of course they're behind it. It's an open world, and it's open for anyone to get in the game and try to do better.
And don't forget that it was through Facebook that somehow we don't know if it was the U.S. or who did it, but somehow someone was able to get into the l'Élysée computer system and record what was going on in the president's office, this sort of thing.
The fact of the matter then, if we look from either side of the Atlantic, Frédéric Douzet, is that simply the technology has moved more quickly, the world has gone along with it much faster than proper debate has been able to keep up about the nature of democracy and privacy and so on.
Yes, but I mean, you were mentioning that we're not going to have a European Facebook, but the Chinese have Weibo and the Russians have their own social networks, and so do the Japanese. So it's interesting. I mean, I understand the lobbying of American companies is really strong to prevent laws from being passed. But on the other hand, I mean, if the European countries were able to have a common voice, they would definitely have tremendous weight in terms of regulations that could maybe help protecting better the data for the Europeans.
It's interesting what Frederick is saying, because it's true that the Chinese have Weibo. It's also true that the Chinese government controls its own internet system a lot more than the American government does. And when Mr. Edward Snowden, the whistleblower in our situation, I highlighted the quote. When he justified what he did, he said that, I quote, I can't in good conscience allow the US government to destroy privacy, internet freedom, and basic liberties for people around the world with this massive surveillance machine they're secretly building. First of all, they're not secretly building it, they've been building it for 60 years.
And fairly openly.
Yeah, and second, if we're looking at government that try to actually curtail internet freedom, we shouldn't be looking at the US government. We could be looking at the Chinese government, at the Iranian government, at the Venezuelan government, surely not at this one. So we have to keep things in proportion once again.
Well, looking particularly at his efforts, here's a tweet that one of you has posted. Whistleblowers are not traitors. We're told they should be protected from the people and organizations they are whistling about. Who are the traitors? Just one of the tweets from you on this subject. Curtis, at the heart of what was just being said, his particular quote about what he did, we've talked about the ins and outs of the competitive advantages that American firms have because so much of this information is held in their own clouds. We've talked about the freedom versus security issue at the heart of American government and its explanation of that trade-off to its own citizens. What about his idea that we've just heard in that quote, that he was protecting privacy, that there was something inherent in all this, that privacy de facto and worldwide was simply being destroyed under our noses without anyone defending it or paying it any attention? Isn't there something in that?
Absolutely. It's because it's an attack on the public sphere, and in a sense. And the public sphere is the source of debate, it's the source of opinion, it's the source of the ideas that are the underpinning of democracy. So we citizens have a responsibility to be watchdogs of our democracy. So I look at the Bradley Manning case, for example. We've turned it on its head, if you will. Bradley Manning is a hero. The people who are prosecuting him I'm thinking about Nuremberg in the back of my mind, and what responsibility do we have as citizens to be watchdogs of our government?
I think the issue of, discussing, publicly debating and discussing safeguards are really important because this is just the beginning. We're going to have more and more personal data online with the Internet of Things, with all the health data that's going to be available. I mean, all kinds of data about people are going to be available through information systems that are sooner or later going to be connected. So the ability of organizations or companies to collect data at a level of privacy that is really high is going to be more and more important.
Gérald, we talk about the importance of these debates. All these debates are to come. The trouble is that it takes one man putting his life, his career on the line in order to get them to us to be able to talk about it. I mean, when asked by the journalist what he expected would happen to him, he replied, nothing good. That's almost certainly the case.
Yeah, I mean, we could be discussing the personality of Edward Snowden, because probably we will be in the next few days. To go back to what Frederick was saying, I quite agree that this kind of thing is going to be happening more and more, just because of technology and the way it's moving forward. I agree with Curtis about the fact that still we have a privacy versus individual freedom issue. However, have we crossed a red line? I don't think so. I think we're far from it yet.
Although the Guardian reporter says there's more to come.
More to come, and no doubt more reports, more debates to come. Christopher Sogoyan in Washington. Curtis was just making the point that it is this public sphere that was being protected by the whistleblower, Mr. Snowden, in question. A public sphere, actually, when you look back at the whistleblowing cases around this sort of issue over the course of the last few years, that is actually only ever protected by underdogs and the press from time to time, but certainly those who are willing to put themselves in dangerous situations. That is one of the big weaknesses of one of the big problems for people like yourself who campaign for the privacy versus the encroachment that we've been talking about, who campaign for this public space, as you've described it, Curtis, to be protected.
I mean, this administration in particular has waged a relentless war against whistleblowers. Bradley Manning is, of course, a high-profile target, but there have been others. This administration has also gone after journalists with a vengeance who have reported on the secret activities of this administration. Being a whistleblower in America in 2013 is an extremely dangerous thing and requires a significant amount of bravery. I also think it's useful to put the recent leaks in context. You know, Mr. Snowden was a computer scientist, or you know, he was an IT expert, and you know, there's a strong libertarian vein running through the computer community that, you know, that feels like privacy is something that needs to be protected. You know, I know lots of people who feel those values too, and you know, if those kinds of documents landed in my lap and I had information revealing the great extent to which the U.S. government was violating the privacy of its own people and people around the world, you know, I hope that I would do the right thing and the brave thing and tell the people too.
Gérald Olivier, I'd like to put that to you first of all. It is something that probably many people, if you bother to ask them, would inherently feel about the internet, that it is a public space, the privacy of which needs to be protected. That is, that people should be able to interact in it free from interference or surveillance from governments, from states, who seek commercial advantage or indeed the protection of their own citizens against terrorism. That there is something inherently vulnerable about the internet and something that needs to be protected by those that use it.
Oh, I would even go further. And actually, to me, it's one of the contradictions in Mr. Snowden's approach and many of the so-called civil libertarians connected with this internet culture, is simply that they want, at the same time, ultimate technology, and they want ultimate transparency. And to me, the two can't go together, because the information age means that the more you're able to communicate, the more people that you may not be aware of are going to be able to have information about you. It's just not possible to work the other way. The interesting thing, today is 2013, we're having this debate, and back in 2000, I believe it was 5, a lawyer from Yale Law School wrote an article about what he called the national surveillance state, which he thought was an outgrowth of the national welfare state and the national security state. And as we go along in the information age, we're going to use information for good purposes or for bad purposes. But you're not going to escape information. It's just like a coin. It has two sides. And it's up to us, it's up to the people to make sure that we maintain a balance between the two.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the issue of context, because we're in a very specific context right now where there's definitely is increasing awareness from the states that the growth, the exponential growth of the internet is threatening their powers and privileges. And the libertarian culture of the pioneers of the internet that was at the beginning, when it was just a small community of users, is now really being seriously challenged by the exponential growth. Powers such as defending, the security of the territory, the domestic security, even issues of sovereignty and the ability to enforce laws, from the point of view of governments, is definitely threatened. And there is definitely a movement by states to try to get better control of the networks right now, not just on surveillance and privacy, but also on the physical infrastructure, on the logical layer, and I think it's also the context that can explain the reaction.
And perhaps as we become aware of these sorts of debates, the question will be whether anyone will actually take them on board and change the way they use the internet. It's one of the tweets that you've sent in. I doubt the NSA's PRISM scandal has caused anyone to change their current internet habits. We'll have to see whether it does. Curtis, the last word to you.
No, I just wanted to go back to something that Gerard said in terms of this proliferation of information. I feel it's the government's responsibility to protect that property. That's part of our intellectual property, not to take advantage of it for nefarious reasons, perhaps.
And it is what people will have been shocked by, the taking advantage of rather than the protection.
Exactly.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, since we're out of time. But thank you very much to all of you in Washington. First of all, Christopher, for being up at the unreasonable hour which you are. Thank you very much indeed for having been with us. Thank you for all of you who joined me here in Paris. It's been a fascinating debate. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow with another look at the issue of the day. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Goodbye.